Have you ever thought to yourself, man, I could come up with better movies than the crap that's being pumped out of Hollywood these days? Well, while most of us might lack the financial resources or nepotistic connections required to start our own movie studios, Lionhead's old game, The Movies, thankfully allows anybody to get a glimpse of what it's like to be a Hollywood bigwig. Granted, the game lacks child stars for you to get hooked on cigarettes and caffeine pills to stunt their growth, so it might not be an entirely accurate simulation of the film industry, but hey, you gotta make do with what you got. Now our story begins in 1930, right in the midst of the golden age of Hollywood. The jazz singer had introduced the public to the revolutionary idea of motion pictures with sound 3 years earlier in 1927, and by the end of the decade, those newfangled talkies had all but killed off the classic silent movie. Now if you're wondering why I didn't actually use an image from the jazz singer, go search for it on Google and see what pops up. I'm not touching that. Anyway, with the industry undergoing this boom period, it seemed like the perfect time for our leading man, Big Daddy Dust, to get on the action, so he decided to found his own movie studio, Half-Baked Epics. It would often be speculated that this was sort of a Great Gatsby situation, and that Big Daddy Dust had originally made his fortune bootlegging during Prohibition, considering the man just showed up one day with a briefcase full of $100,000 in cold hard cash at the height of the Depression, but those accusations could never be proven. Still, while the average person might have pushed their own mother down a flight of stairs for that type of dough back in those days, Big Daddy Dust quickly realized that it didn't go nearly as far out in Hollywood, and he was admittedly forced to cut a few corners. Once the blueprints were all drawn up though, it was time to hire some builders and put them to work, and then watch like a proud papa as his new studio slowly sprang to life. Of course, building and simply maintaining a studio isn't cheap, so Big Daddy Dust was eager to start work on his first film. However, while he might have intended on directing all of the films he produced, he had absolutely no intention of writing his own material like some sort of nerd, so he quickly brought on the writing team of Jan Galloway and Dan Cheston. You also need actors to, act, and while none of the current prospects were particularly impressive, the young Harvey Robson at least had some experience, so he got the nod. Also, what could possibly go wrong having a Harvey involved in the entertainment industry? Big Daddy Dust seemed to agree as he quickly hit off with his new star. Filming would start in late December of 1930, and production would wrap up in May the following year. The result was The Vat. The critics at the time were absolutely ruthless. Cinema Magazine stated that it contained bottom-tier direction, while the writer for Filmy Journal made the dubious claim that they'd seen chimps act more convincingly. So yeah, it wasn't exactly Dr. Caligari, but The Vat did what it needed to do, which was get some money rolling in, ensuring that Half-Baked Epics would be able to keep the lights on. Big Daddy Dust would also waste little time reinvesting some of those profits back in the studio in the form of new sets, a much appreciated janitorial staff, as well as a few other items that were deemed to be essential. He would follow up The Vat with The Gutter Dwellers in 1932, which also starred Harvey. Then the following year, he'd introduce audiences to newcomer Adam Clixby in Hell is for the Dead. While his output during this era has received more appreciation in recent years, even Big Daddy Dust himself wouldn't deny that he'd spent the first half of the 30s working on B pictures. Still, despite the regular abuse he received from critics and limited commercial success of these early films, Big Daddy Dust would often reflect back fondly on this period. He explained that the leaner budgets and tighter shooting schedules actually allowed him to take more artistic risks in those early days, because even if a movie bombed, you were still likely going to walk away with a decent return on your investment. However, as is the case with almost every creative, there is this part of Big Daddy Dust that just inexplicably required validation from complete strangers, so looking to cash in on the sensational headlines generated by the outlaw couple Bernie and Claude, he would begin work on the romantic drama Cold Bullet.
Well, anyway, when we're not
That innocuous little kiss caused so much backlash, many theaters south of the Mason-Dixon line refused to even carry the film. Critics were also quick to point out that Cold Bullet was a blatant cash grab, with one going so far as to say that it might go down as the studio's worst film to date. However, as a successful Carney once taught me, controversy creates cash, and Cold Bullet would easily become Half-Baked Epic's most successful release up to that point. But its success would ultimately end up eating away at Big Daddy Dust and left him bitter as he began to question the artistic integrity of the entire industry. He then vowed never again to compromise his vision and symbolically had the script office dismantled and a new one put up in its place to usher in a new era for half-baked epics. This renewed focus would lead to what many consider to be the studio's golden age, kicking off with 1936's Alien Under My Bed, which was quickly followed up by the classic Don't Make Me Ax You Again in 1938. However, as the 30s drew to a close, Big Daddy Dust found attention shifting away from horror and towards comedy. While only a few years earlier he'd vowed to never again betray his artistic principles, the outbreak of war in Europe meant that he considered it his patriotic duty to provide the nation with a little relief during these uncertain times. Now, if it just so happened to improve both his financial and social standings, well, that was just a bonus. And so, the beginning of the 40s would see the studio produce the classic comedies The Kid Rode Away, Hey That's Not Quite War, and Vampire Chutney. All three films did respectable at the box office, and Hey That's Not Quite War in particular has been praised by later generations for its pacifist themes. However, Big Daddy Dust could never keep away from his first love for long, and as the war drew to a close, he found himself catching that horror bug yet again and would start production on his most ambitious film to date, Golgotha Lives. Golgotha was a massive undertaking for the studio, with a budget exceeding $70,000 and taking 19 months to shoot. However, the gamble would pay off. Critics absolutely raved about it, and it would debut at the top of the charts. The good fortune extended behind the scenes as well, as Big Daddy Dust's rising star had drawn the attention of renowned actress Carrie Ann Bryce, who was eager to work with the famed director. Her demands were both extensive and exhaustive, so as soon as both sides finished negotiations, Big Daddy Dust quickly started to work preparing for his next project, which would turn out to be 1947's Dogs of This Parish. Dogs was another hit, and it was actually the film that managed to displace Golgotha from its run at the top of the box office. Yet something had changed in Big Daddy Dust during its production. The movie-making process had seemed to lose a lot of its magic, and was starting to feel more like an actual job. His first film had been made with 4 people and had only taken 5 months to shoot. Now the size of the average crew had more than doubled, and the average film took 3 to 4 times as long to make. And it certainly didn't help when another star, Tilly Hammonds, showed up at the studio gates. Big Daddy had no interest in bringing another prima donna on, but he was overruled by several of his new investors and forced to bring Tilly into the fold. To make matters worse, in order to cover her massive salary, Big Daddy Dust was forced to let go of his old boy Harvey. In fact, it's rumored that his resentment over Harvey's dismissal led Big Daddy Dust to convince the other executives that Tilly needed plastic surgery before they started shooting their next film. However, Big Daddy Dust always denied this and was once quoted as saying, "The woman was closing in on 40, what'd you expect?" As you can imagine, he hasn't exactly remained popular with feminist groups throughout the years. Still, despite all this turmoil, Big Daddy Dust had seemingly pulled himself together and was on his best behavior during the filming of Dungeon of Light. He was said to be extremely proud of the movie too, considering it to be the culmination of everything he learned as a filmmaker up to that point. So he was extremely crushed when the film failed to live up to expectations. Dungeon of Light was far from a box office bomb, but it failed to replicate the massive success of his 2 predecessors. Now, part of this was attributed to the public's waning interest in horror, but a fair share of the blame was laid at the feet of Adam Clixby, who many in the studio felt was over the hill. And so Big Daddy Dust was forced to let go of yet another one of his longtime stars. Now completely depressed, when the studio heads also suggested his next picture was a more traditional and safe action movie, he didn't even have the heart to fight him on it. Cool Joe Gunn would prove that the old pro was still more than capable of handling more mainstream fare, and would help the studio resume its standing near the top of the charts, but the making of it would leave its director a broken man. The amicable gentleman who had originally won over the nation was long gone, and in his place was a boorish drunk who would frequently be spotted stumbling around the studio in an alcoholic haze. The press seemed to take a perverse pleasure reveling in his downfall too, so these incidents were frequently front-page material for tabloids all across America. There were even reports that he developed the habit of drunkenly harassing his female talent, although thankfully for him, this was long before the Me Too movement, and back then you just had to keep your mouth shut if you knew what was good for you. Still, when his issues began to set back production and cost the studio tens of thousands of dollars, Big Daddy Dust was eventually forced to admit that he had a problem and admit himself into rehab. He was one of the most famous people on the planet, and he built a small independent studio up into one of the most respected in the industry, but he was also completely miserable. Because while most of us have some innate desire to be famous, the lucky few who are able to achieve this dream often realize just how hollow the celebrity lifestyle truly is. What's up everybody, Dusty here. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Or don't. Don't let me tell you how to live your life. Either way, thanks for watching. I'm out. Peace.